I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
The announcement did not arrive through ceremony, applause, or a carefully staged royal appearance. It came through a sealed palace decree, carrying consequences so severe that even senior courtiers struggled to speak. Camilla had been stripped of the prince title connected to her royal standing, while members of her family were permanently barred from entering British soil. Within minutes, one signature had transformed a private royal conflict into an irreversible act of exile. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Camilla held the page so tightly that the paper bent beneath her fingers. The color drained from her face as she reached the sentence naming her family, because the order did far more than remove a title. A royal decree was a formal command issued under the monarch's authority, and this one cancelled ceremonial recognition, household privileges, security access, and every claim her relatives held to royal hospitality. Nothing about it was temporary. Charles stood several feet away, trapped between the woman he loved and the crown he had sworn to defend. He removed his reading glasses, placed them beside the document, and said nothing. His silence cut deeper than anger. Camilla looked toward him, waiting for comfort, but the king lowered his eyes. She understood that this punishment had not been forced upon him. He had allowed it. A courtier near the doorway noticed the signatures beneath the royal seal. William had countersigned the order. Princess Anne had done the same. Their names proved that the decision reached across 2 generations of the line, joining the present monarch, the future king, and the family's most disciplined guardian in one devastating act. The decree was not merely Charles's choice. It was the palace closing ranks. Camilla turned to the classified appendix attached behind the final page. A classified appendix was a restricted section containing evidence too sensitive for public release, and its contents transformed humiliation into fear. It referred to private access, unauthorized influence, and repeated efforts to interfere with decisions connected to the succession. Every line suggested that the palace had been watching for longer than she realized. Then, she found the final paragraph. One unnamed member of her own family had provided testimony supporting the action. Her hand fell to the table. She looked directly at Charles and asked whether he had known her relatives would be banished. He did not answer. He simply closed the red dispatch box between them. But the decree was only the public wound. Behind it stood a circle of royals whose personal loyalties had already been tested to breaking point. Behind every royal decree are people who must live with its consequences long after the seals have dried. For Camilla, the punishment threatened more than status. It cut directly into the private world she had spent years protecting. For Charles, it forced a choice between the woman beside him and the crown he had sworn to defend. For William and Anne, the decision carried another burden, proving that family loyalty could no longer outweigh royal survival. Camilla remained in the closed sitting room after the red dispatch box had been taken away. She reached for the telephone and called her sister, but the words would not come easily. The queen consort had spent years binding her royal position to the family who had stood beside her before palace approval ever arrived. Now the ban meant they could not visit, attend private royal occasions, enter protected residences, or even travel into Britain under informal arrangements. This was not merely the loss of privilege, it was forced separation. Her sister listened in stunned silence as she explained that every invitation had been cancelled. Camilla tried to sound controlled, yet her voice broke when she admitted that no family gathering could now take place on British soil. The punishment had turned her royal home into a place where those closest to her were forbidden. She ended the call without saying goodbye and remained still, feeling the full weight of isolation. William paused outside Charles's study before placing his hand on the door. He knew the decree protected his future reign from private pressure, but he also understood what it had cost his father. The prince had supported the order because succession decisions would shape appointments, residences, access, and authority when he eventually became king. Allowing private relatives to influence those choices would weaken the boundary between the crown and personal favor. Charles sat inside, holding an old photograph of himself and Camilla from years before the throne had made every private choice a public burden. When his son entered, the king did not look up. William chose his words carefully and said, "This cannot be about what we want anymore." The monarch stared at the image for another moment, then placed it face down. Anne met William later, without aides present. She revealed through a documented palace account that the decree had been delayed twice because Charles refused to approve the permanent travel ban. Each time, he had argued that removing access was enough and exile went too far. The princess understood his pain, but she also knew hesitation had allowed the danger to grow. A senior courtier had already recorded that Camilla's relatives received formal warnings months earlier. They had been told to stop contacting palace staff about titles, residences, and future ceremonial roles. Those warnings were ignored. Then, Anne told William what finally changed everything. One piece of evidence had reached Charles during a closed succession ceremony, and after seeing it, even he could no longer defend delay. To understand why the palace chose exile over another warning, the story must return to the private ceremony where one forbidden request crossed the final line. The crisis did not begin with the decree. It began 3 weeks earlier, inside a sealed chamber, where only 6 people had been permitted to witness a private succession briefing. No cameras were present, no press statement followed, and no guest list was released. Yet before that meeting ended, a handwritten alteration appeared beside William's future accession plans, an alteration that attempted to secure permanent authority for Camilla's family after Charles's reign. William entered the chamber expecting a controlled discussion, not a hidden challenge to his future authority. The private succession briefing had been arranged to settle ceremonial roles, household access, security arrangements, and constitutional responsibilities connected to his eventual accession. Accession meant the moment a new monarch formally inherited the crown, and every decision surrounding it would shape who held influence once Charles's reign ended. Only 6 people sat around the table: Charles, William, Anne, Camilla, the Lord Chamberlain, and a senior constitutional advisor. The Lord Chamberlain was the official responsible for managing major parts of the royal household and ceremonial order. With such a narrow circle present, no alteration could be dismissed as confusion created by distant staff. Someone inside that room had placed it there. William turned another page and stopped. A handwritten proposal granted 2 members of Camilla's family continued access to royal residences and a private advisory role after his father's death. The prince read it twice. His face hardened, because the wording did not merely protect relatives from embarrassment. It created a path for them to remain close to appointments, confidential schedules, and household decisions during his reign. Camilla leaned forward and insisted the request was about protection, not power. She argued that her family had endured years of public hostility and should not be cast aside the moment Charles was gone. The queen consort spoke with growing fear, but Anne did not soften. The princess asked why the proposal had entered William's accession file without his knowledge or approval. Then Anne reached across the table and removed an unsigned memorandum titled "Continuity of the Queen's Household." A memorandum was a formal written proposal used to record or recommend an official course of action. She laid it flat before Charles and asked Camilla whether the future king had ever agreed to its terms. Camilla looked toward her husband instead of answering. The constitutional advisor broke the silence. He explained that the wording would allow private relatives to retain unofficial influence over royal appointments, residence access, and confidential household communications. Charles immediately called it a misunderstanding. The king said fear had been mistaken for ambition and urged everyone to slow down. Anne remained still. She opened a second folder and revealed, through an authorized recorded conversation, that the memorandum had been discussed weeks before the ceremony. Camilla's defense collapsed into silence. William realized the proposal had not appeared by accident, while Charles understood that denial could no longer protect anyone. When the recorded conversation was finally played, the private disagreement erupted into the confrontation that ended every possibility of compromise. The doors were locked, the aides were dismissed, and for the first time, no courtier remained to soften the language between them. Camilla stood opposite William and Anne as the recorded conversation played across the room. Every sentence tightened the silence. Charles listened without moving, while the voices on the recording discussed future access, family protection, and influence after his reign. By the time it ended, the conflict was no longer constitutional. It was devastatingly personal. William waited until the final voice disappeared before turning toward Camilla. The confrontation had moved into Charles's private library, where no secretary, legal advisor, or household official remained to interrupt them. That mattered because every word now belonged to the family alone. No statement could be rewritten. No courtier could turn anger into softer language. The four of them had reached the point where truth would either break the plan or break the people defending it. Anne kept one hand beside the recorder and explained that the conversation had been captured during an authorized security review. Such a review was a formal examination of possible threats involving protected information, restricted schedules, and access to senior royals. Palace staff had requested it after repeated attempts were made to obtain succession timetables that were never meant to leave secure offices. William stepped closer. He accused Camilla of treating his future reign like an inheritance that could be divided among private relatives. The prince said his accession was not a reward to be negotiated behind closed doors. It would determine who entered royal homes, who saw protected documents, and who stood close enough to influence decisions affecting the entire monarchy. Camilla's fear turned into anger. She reminded him that her family had endured years of ridicule while she fought for acceptance inside the palace. The queen consort refused to let those closest to her be discarded once the crown no longer needed her. She insisted that protection was not the same as control, but her voice shook as the recording continued to expose something far more organized. A family representative could be heard discussing which royal residence might remain available after Charles's death. The same voice described how loyal palace staff could be pressured to preserve private access even after William took the throne. Camilla looked toward the king, but he could no longer hide behind silence. Charles admitted she had once asked him to sign a private protection letter. He believed it would guarantee dignity and financial security, not create lasting influence over the next reign. The monarch said he had never understood how far the plan had developed. His confession wounded her and confirmed William's deepest suspicion. William asked whether she had placed her family's future above the crown's security. Camilla removed her wedding ring, set it on the table, and stared at it for several seconds. Then she quietly put it back on without answering. Anne opened a second folder and pushed it toward Charles. Inside were security reports that transformed the conflict from private ambition into national danger. Yet anger alone could not produce a decree of permanent exile. The true power behind the decision came from evidence even Charles could no longer dismiss. The second folder changed everything. Until that moment, Charles could still describe the conflict as a painful family dispute. But the security reports transformed private ambition into a threat the monarchy could not ignore. Dates, telephone records, visitor logs, and copied briefing notes formed a pattern too deliberate to dismiss. One member of Camilla's family had repeatedly sought information about future royal appointments, and someone inside the palace had been helping them. Charles opened the report and immediately recognized several names. He had welcomed those people into private rooms, trusted them near family gatherings, and allowed them close to conversations never meant to travel beyond palace walls. Now the visitor logs showed repeated meetings on dates linked to confidential succession planning. The shame struck him hard because his personal trust may have exposed not only William's future household, but Catherine's growing authority as well. Anne remained beside him and explained why she had requested the investigation. Palace staff had reported unusual questions about future appointments, private residences, protected schedules, and ceremonial roles. The Royal Household Security Committee was the body responsible for examining threats involving confidential communications and access to senior members of the monarchy. Its concern was not gossip. It was whether private influence had begun reaching into decisions that could shape the next reign. William said nothing. The prince watched his father move through each page, refusing to add pressure when the evidence was already doing enough. He knew the reports mattered because any leak involving his future household could allow outsiders to shape appointments before he became king. He also knew that Catherine's position could be weakened if private relatives gained influence over which duties, residences, or staff remained under her authority. Charles stopped at the name of a private social secretary. The official had passed confidential details to a family representative after being told the requests carried Camilla's approval. A social secretary was a trusted aide who handled invitations, private contacts, and personal arrangements. In the wrong hands, that access could quietly open doors no public title ever could. Anne watched her brother struggle and lowered her voice. She told him that protecting the crown did not erase his love for Camilla. It only meant that love could no longer decide what happened next. Her words were gentle, but they left him nowhere to hide. Then Charles reached the signed witness statement. Camilla's nephew had confirmed, in a documented account, that older relatives discussed securing a permanent position before William became king. They feared losing access after the reign changed, and they believed action had to be taken while the current monarch could still approve it. Charles removed his fountain pen but could not sign. Anne placed her hand beside the decree, never touching him, and waited. William remained silent. At last, the king asked what penalty the committee recommended. The constitutional advisor answered with 2 words: permanent exclusion. Charles lowered the pen and signed. Once the signature was placed on the decree, the palace machinery moved without hesitation, and Camilla's old life began disappearing before sunset. Royal punishment rarely arrives with shouting. It arrives through cancelled passes, silent telephone calls, changed locks, and names disappearing from lists. Within hours of Charles signing the decree, Camilla's family lost security clearance, guest privileges, travel permissions, and access to royal residences. Vehicles were turned away. Invitations were withdrawn. Staff received new instructions. The Queen Consort watched the world around her change through decisions already entered into systems she could no longer control. Camilla stood at the upstairs window of Clarence's house when a familiar vehicle stopped at the gates below. The driver lowered the window, accepted a written refusal from security, and slowly reversed into the street. Her relative had not even reached the front door. The order had already cancelled entry credentials at Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, Sandringham, and every protected residence connected to the royal household. Her telephone rang moments later. Camilla answered and heard her son's anger before he finished the first sentence. His planned journey to London had been blocked before departure, and officials had informed him that the restriction was permanent. She tried to explain that the decree was already active, but the admission broke something inside her. This was no longer a threat waiting to be negotiated. Her family had been shut out in real time. The Home Office had received the royal directive supporting the entry prohibition. That directive was the formal instruction allowing government authorities to enforce the palace decision at Britain's borders. At the same time, lawyers began removing ceremonial references connected to the revoked prince title, while household staff erased names from invitation lists, private calendars, and residence records. Charles entered the apartment and found Camilla packing family photographs into a leather case. The king stopped near the doorway, unable to offer comfort without confronting the fact that his own signature had caused the scene before him. She asked whether she still belonged in those rooms. He answered that their marriage remained, but his voice carried no certainty about anything beyond it. A household notice arrived before either of them could continue. Camilla could remain his wife, yet she would lose authority over appointments, patronage recommendations, and private guest access. Patronage meant the public support a royal gave to charities and organizations, often carrying real influence and prestige. Losing control over those recommendations stripped away one of the last practical forms of power attached to her position. Another order followed. Her personal office had 48 hours to surrender communication records, private schedules, and archived correspondence. The demand suggested that the investigation had not ended with the decree. Camilla looked at Charles and understood that more names, more calls, and more hidden requests could still surface. Then the door opened. Catherine entered alone and asked that every aide leave. Camilla closed the case but did not sit. She expected another warning, another demand, another cold reminder of what she had lost. The palace expected Catherine to deliver another warning, but behind the closed door, she offered Camilla something far more difficult than punishment, a final chance to tell the truth. There were no advisors in the room, no legal documents between them, and no monarch waiting to decide who was right. Catherine and Camilla sat alone, as two women whose lives had been reshaped by the same institution in very different ways. One represented the monarchy's future. The other faced the sudden collapse of the place she had fought decades to secure. What passed between them would determine whether the final chapter ended in defiance or acceptance. Catherine did not begin with accusation. She told Camilla that the palace no longer needed another statement written by lawyers, courtiers, or officials protecting their own language. It needed a truthful personal account. That mattered because every unanswered question would deepen suspicion, while every hidden detail could damage William's future household before his reign had even begun. Camilla understood the power behind those words. The princess now carried growing influence over future household standards, ceremonial conduct, and private access during William's eventual reign. Household standards meant the rules controlling who could enter royal spaces, advise senior figures, and remain close to sensitive decisions. Catherine had not come as a rival. She had come as someone responsible for preventing the same crisis from happening again. Catherine leaned forward and spoke plainly. She said the greatest damage had not come from Camilla loving her family. It had come from trying to secure influence for them without William's knowledge or consent. The future king could not inherit a household already shaped by private promises. His authority had to begin free from hidden bargains. Camilla sat rigidly across the room, holding herself together through anger alone. Then the anger weakened. She admitted that fear had driven her actions. The queen consort believed that once Charles was gone, every person connected to her would be pushed out of royal life, as though they had never mattered. She had spent years fighting for acceptance, and the thought of her family being erased had become unbearable. The truth came slowly after that. Camilla revealed through a private recorded account that she had not authorized every request for schedules, appointments, or residence access. A senior family member had expanded the plan beyond what she first intended, turning protection into a wider attempt to preserve influence. She named the relative and agreed to surrender the correspondence proving where her involvement ended and where the other person's actions began. Catherine felt sympathy, but she did not soften the consequences. She asked whether Camilla would publicly accept the decree, provide a complete recorded statement, and avoid challenging William or Anne. The princess made clear that honesty could restore dignity, but it could not restore power. Camilla finally moved from the chair across the room and sat beside her. Her hands trembled as she passed over a sealed envelope containing the statement and private letters. She agreed to accept the punishment without resistance. Catherine left carrying the envelope while palace officials prepared the announcement. By morning, the private confession had become a public reckoning, and the image outside the palace captured a nation struggling to decide whether it had witnessed justice or cruelty. At sunrise, the palace gates became the center of a national argument. Some saw the decree as the harsh but necessary defense of the crown. Others saw a woman publicly stripped of dignity and separated from her family. Television screens carried the same words across Britain, while newspapers printed photographs of Camilla leaving through a side entrance. Yet one single image, silent, ordinary, and painfully human, came to define the entire day. Buckingham Palace released the statement shortly after dawn. It confirmed the removal of Camilla's prince-linked title, the loss of her household powers, and the permanent entry ban imposed on named relatives. A royal sanction was an official punishment issued within the monarchy, and broadcasters called this the strongest internal action of its kind in modern palace history. The reason mattered. The decision was presented as a defense of succession security and a warning that private family influence could never control the future crown. Charles watched the coverage alone. The king remained still until one commentator asked whether he had sacrificed his wife to protect William's reign. Another voice described the decree as a victory for discipline over love. He reached for the remote and switched off the television before the debate could continue. Silence filled the room, but it offered no relief. William heard the crowds gathering outside the palace. The prince had supported the decree because hidden access to future appointments could weaken his authority before he even became king. Yet the sound beyond the gates carried a different truth. A decision could be necessary and still look cruel. He understood that the monarchy had protected its structure while risking the appearance of having no mercy. Camilla sat through the same coverage without speaking. The queen consort watched a newspaper front page appear across the screen, with 4 words printed above a black vehicle leaving Clarence House without an escort. The crown closes the gates. Catherine remained nearby, holding the sealed statement that explained fear, influence, and the line Camilla admitted she had crossed. Then the broadcast fell quiet. A palace attendant approached the temporary ceremonial display outside Buckingham Palace and removed Camilla's family crest from its stand. The crest was a personal emblem used to represent a family's recognized place within royal ceremony. Behind the barriers, one woman lowered a small Union flag. Another began applauding, then slowly stopped as the attendant carried the emblem inside. The image spread within minutes. It captured punishment without shouting, exile without chains, and the final removal of a family from royal life. Even Camilla looked away. That evening, Charles summoned William, Anne, Catherine, and Camilla for one last meeting. No statement could settle what remained between them. No headline could decide whether the crown had chosen justice, survival, or both. The world had delivered its judgment in headlines and silence. But the final verdict could come only from the 5 people whose lives had been changed inside the palace walls. The final meeting did not restore what had been lost. It did not remove the travel ban, return the title, or reopen the palace gates. Instead, it forced each person to accept the price of the decision. Camilla had to face the damage created by fear. Charles had to accept that love could not excuse dangerous influence. William and Anne had to recognize that protecting the monarchy sometimes meant wounding the family within it. Charles spoke first. The king confirmed that the decree was permanent, the prince-linked title would not be restored, and Camilla's relatives would remain barred from Britain. No future monarch could reverse the order without a full constitutional and security review. Such a review would require officials to examine the evidence, risks, and legal consequences before any royal punishment could be reconsidered. His words closed the last path back. William then established a new household rule. No relative of a serving royal could receive unofficial access, influence, residence rights, or succession-related privileges without written approval. The prince understood why this mattered. Private promises had nearly shaped his future reign before it began, and the crown could never again allow family fear to become hidden authority. Camilla lowered her eyes and accepted responsibility. The queen consort admitted that her desire to protect her family had slowly become an attempt to control what happened after Charles's reign. She insisted that she had never wanted to weaken William. She had only feared that everyone connected to her would be abandoned once her husband was gone. Yet fear had crossed a line, and she no longer denied it. Charles turned toward her and apologized. He admitted that his silence had allowed the crisis to grow, until the monarchy had only one severe option left. The monarch had mistaken delay for compassion, but delay had protected no one. It had deepened the danger, damaged trust, and made the final punishment harsher than it might have been. Catherine remained beside William as Camilla's recorded statement was played. The account cleared them both of personal revenge and confirmed that evidence, not rivalry, had forced the palace to act. The princess listened without triumph. She understood that truth had protected the future crown, but it had also destroyed the life another woman had spent years building. Anne stepped forward and returned the wedding ring left behind during the confrontation. The princess placed it in Camilla's hand, making one thing clear: her royal authority had ended, but her marriage had not. Camilla slipped the ring back onto her finger and signed the declaration, accepting every sanction. Before leaving, Camilla placed her former household seal in front of William. He closed his hand around it, thanked her quietly, and did not celebrate. Charles moved beside her as they approached the doorway, choosing personal loyalty without challenging the crown. The palace's final move was not a triumph over Camilla. It was a declaration that no marriage, private loyalty, or powerful family connection could stand above the future of the monarchy. She lost the authority she had fought to secure. Charles preserved their bond, but not their shared influence. William inherited a stronger institution and the painful knowledge that leadership can demand decisions without winners. The crown survived because duty finally defeated fear, and every person in that room paid the price. The doors closed behind Camilla, not as the beginning of another battle, but as the unmistakable end of an era the palace had decided could never return. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.